For people who know the brand, Alex Liang, but not the person, how would you introduce yourself beyond your bio?
Oh my goodness. I don't know. So a lot of my life is already online.
Yeah.
When I meet people, sometimes I'm actually quite surprised at how much they actually paid attention. Sometimes I think, oh, I post this and that, and people, it just goes out into the ether. Not everyone's going to care. And then all of a sudden someone brings something up and I'm like, oh, wait, I did post that. Like, you're very attentive. So I think a roundabout way to answer the question is when I do meet people in real life, I really like to spend time to get to know them. And
Yeah.
that's something about me. I'm interested in and curious about other people's story.
This is the Asian Rebel Club podcast, a space for the ones who grew up chasing approval and are now learning how to be free. I am Crystal Ren, entrepreneur, creative, and recovering achievement addict. Each week, we dive into honest conversations with Asian rebels, rewriting what success, identity, and freedom really mean. If you're ready to live your story, not somebody else, welcome home.
Welcome to the other episode of Asian Rebel Club. We have Alex here. So Alexander Kenton Liang is a Canadian key opinion leader and entrepreneur. He was a style expert at On Slice Style Factory and has appeared on City TV's Breakfast Television, The Morning Show, and also named one of Canada's top style influencers. Alex is also a graduate of Parsons School of Design in New York City, with hundreds of thousands of followers on social media. He has worked with brands such as Fendi, David Yurman. Oh my gosh, Alex, you're kidding me. There's such a long list of brands, Mercedes-Benz, Lexus, and whatever luxury brands you can think about, he's worked with them. So now the scope of his work has also expanded into including luxury real estate, home staging, and also design and marketing consulting projects. Most importantly, Alex is also my cousin-in-law. Welcome to the show, Alex.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. I'm excited to be on here, and I'm looking forward to, hearing and seeing, I guess, what we're going to be chatting about because I have no idea. So I'm quite excited. I think it's really cool that you're doing this podcast. And just this whole project is exciting to be a part of.
Yeah. So I am so excited as well for a lot of insights we're going to dig out because even during my research, I had already discovered so many things I didn't know about you. And I can't wait for the whole family to listen to this interview and know more about you. So, okay, the first question I want to ask you is, for people who know the brand, Alex Liang, but not the person, how would you introduce yourself beyond your bio?
Oh my goodness. I don't know. So a lot of my life is already online.
Yeah.
So I think actually when I meet people, sometimes I'm actually quite surprised at how much they actually paid attention. Sometimes I post this and that and it just goes out into the ether and I don't think not everyone's going to care. And then all of a sudden someone brings something up and I'm like, oh, wait, I did post that. Like, you're very attentive. So I think, I guess a roundabout way to answer the question is when I do meet people in real life, I really like to spend time to get to know them. And that's something about me. I'm interested in and curious about other people's story and like what makes them tick and like what's their background and how did they get to where they are, where are they in their life journey, because they already know about mine. And I think if they're interested in talking to me because of things online, then I think it's always an interesting point to then find out about them and like why did we connect, I find that really fascinating.
That's very interesting because that's like the opposite of your image online, right? Because, you used to be a style influencer and it's all about showing your style to the world and to like maybe lead people towards certain styles or trends. But in real life, you are the opposite. You actually want to know other people and their stories and you care more about the connection.
Definitely. Yeah. I think like with the online brand, like the personal brand world, even in real estate, for me, it's just sharing it as much as I can while still, guarding my own privacy, but like, sharing about my life and sharing things that would make me relatable to others and that are authentic to me. So stuff that I feel really, passionate about. For example, like I post a lot about gardening at home. I love gardening. That's like, a lot of other people who love gardening, I wouldn't maybe necessarily know that they did, but then we connect on it. On Instagram, which is really cool. So there's people that I do already know that are into it.
Yeah.
that I didn't know about before because I started sharing it. So that's one thing that's really cool about social media is that you connect with people on so many varying topics and things or travels and stuff.
Yeah.
And you might not know that you had that in common.
Yeah. At least to me, it feels like a surprise for a person like me who's, a consumer of social media. I always feel like the influencers just want to show people like, this is me, look at me, like all eyes on me. But I didn't know that there's a huge part of social media or like people, rather like why people want to be influencers, probably because they want to connect with other people on a deeper level. And it's not about like looking at me and all eyes on me, whatever.
Yeah, I get inspired by looking at others on social media as well and connecting with people
Yeah.
who are like-minded. And I think that's one of the coolest parts about it. I mean, the industry, the reason that I then part of the reason I started to transition out of the industry, apart from just getting older and feeling like tired and like just being like, okay, I don't really want to have my whole life online all the time.
Yeah.
But the other thing is I find that the industry got a little bit superficial where there are younger people just getting into wanting to, be an influencer.
Right.
Because they want the fame. They think that they're going to get things from brands.
Yeah.
They love the kind of celebrity of it all. And there's lots of influencers.
I thought that this is the reason why everybody went to that industry.
Well, so I actually went in originally because I came from the editorial world. So I thought, I saw that things were moving online and I said, well, here's the way to like bring brands to the forefront. And then I think in generating the content, the more things that I shared that were kind of personal, it gave that personal connection. So then personal style came into play, lifestyle, things I was doing. And then it became a bit more of a more powerful endorsement. So it started from more editorial, just sharing products, brands, experiences, and all of that. And then it started to shift into a bit, I guess a slight level of like online celebrity.
Yeah.
But to the people who are most popular online, it's because they're not necessarily in it for just that, but they have a specific reason for their brand, reason for their content and behind their content. Because there's so many influencers now. They come and go, and people just think, oh, I'm going to get into this. I'm going to be famous, and brands are going to send me stuff. Okay, well, then what are you going to do after that? Why does someone want to follow you? Why does someone want to connect with you?
Yeah, I mean, I think that also applies to all industries, right? Like you can go into, let's just pick a boring profession. No offense to anyone who's a lawyer. Like if you really wanted to be, the best lawyer, you gotta be passionate about law, right? You can't just be like,
Absolutely.
like it sounds great, like, and it looks great on paper. Like I'm a lawyer, everybody thinks I'm smart. Like you're gonna be burned out in no time if you don't like what you do. There needs to be a why that is more substantial than, hey, this is what I can show to people about who I am. It's about the soul of who you are.
Absolutely. I do a lot of like mentorship for kind of students in my old school. So like high school age students. And a lot of times I do say like, okay, if you're going to be applying to universities and you're picking all these universities, make sure you pick, the program that you're interested in. Think about your path and like, well, firstly, nothing is forever. I've already switched careers. So but also, we get this idea sometimes. Definitely in Asian culture, but in everything, I think in just North America right now, maybe in Asia and Europe too, but certainly in North America, we have this thing of like, you're going to go to this specific university, the university name matters, all these things. But then you get there and guess what? You have to actually do the program and you have to make it to the graduation. So, and then after that, then you have to go and do the occupation. So I think there is like a deeper level of thinking that needs to happen of where you want to be and how you kind of see your day-to-day being.
Yeah, and you can do this for like 50 years instead of like, I don't know, 5 years here, 5 years there, right? So, okay, so let's go back to your childhood. You grew up in Vancouver in a Chinese household, even though that was I would say that's a very westernized community. So what was young Alex like?
Like what age? How far back?
Walk us through, I don't know, like all ages when you were growing up there.
Yeah, I think I had a pretty sheltered and I'd say a pretty privileged like youth. I did go to a university prep school, independent private school. It was, very, very like it was very like encouraging and supportive to me.
Mm-hmm.
I had a lot of like individual attention with the school, and my parents were very hands-on. They were quite directive of how I was going, but I think I was pretty obedient. I was a pretty good kid.
Really? You were
I
obedient.
wasn't really like my big rebellions are usually when I have like big ideas that I want to do or implement. I would say actually later in life. Like when I was younger, I think that I was pretty good. I was bad like when I was in elementary school. Like I didn't want to go to school at all. So, that aside,
Mm.
I would just like cry and collapse on the sidewalk and not want to go to school. But like, in the academically and everything, I was pretty diligent. I
Yeah.
didn't really like have any crazy rebellion preteen years or anything
Gotcha.
like that. Yeah.
Okay.
I would say it was
So,
like I was borderline boring.
well, I mean, like your life is not boring at all. It seems like.
Yeah, we were very lucky to travel a lot, I will say. So my day-to-day was very regimented and routine of going to school. I ran competitive track and field, so I did a lot of that after school, developing like artistic talents and kind of just, that sort of well-roundedness, but, to a certain degree and just staying on that routine. But then my parents loved to travel, so we
Mm.
traveled a lot internationally. So I got to see a lot
Yeah,
of the world that way and open my eyes to other perspectives through
for
that,
sure.
and like and friends we've had, in Europe and Asia and places that were different and who could lend a different perspective. So I did get a lot of that, and then I guess then after high school, then I moved to New York. So that was a whole
Right.
different whole.
Yeah. I mean, so first of all, like I know that your parents love to travel. They're in Singapore right now, and I'm not
Yes,
there. So I just
I
missed it.
know the irony of that.
But I am going to see them after I go back to Singapore, which is good. And do you ever feel was identity tension between, obviously you were Asian, but the neighborhood you're in, and assume that the schools you guys are in were more kind of, dominated by Caucasian. And how did you deal with the tension if there was any?
Yeah, didn't really feel that much. Well, I didn't necessarily feel tension with other people. I would say it was an interesting experience. I'm not very connected even to this day. I don't feel super connected to
Hmm.
Chinese culture. I mean, I think it's part of me, but it's not like all of me, if that makes
Hmm.
sense.
Yeah.
I think it wasn't like tension. It was just like something different that made me unique,
Mm.
I guess, in my class. And I think there was one other Chinese kid that came from
Hmm.
Taiwan, though. So yeah, I mean, being born here too, it kind of just was visually different, which is
Yeah.
part of the class.
Right.
Yeah, it felt a little bit different, I guess. And like, we had different traditions, but then like in school, we would be doing like, I know my mom like came to school, I remember, and she like did a whole little Chinese New Year thing, and that was like part of our school. And I mean, now it's like so prevalent
Yeah.
in elementary schools.
Right.
And I was getting older through elementary and high school, though. Our class, like the unique thing was our school was very small and it had just opened basically like when I was in grade one, grade two.
Mm.
So as the school grew, and then they added classes in grade 6 and grade 8 for my years to get to like the maximum capacity of the school, then we started bringing in more people. So then we had a huge influx of like other Asians that had just immigrated to Canada, and it was kind of immigration in Canada was happening at the same time that the school was growing. So we all of a sudden had, you know, Koreans joining our class, Japanese. We had lots of like South Asians coming in,
Hmm.
and then the whole mix changed. By the time I graduated from high school, it would probably be what it is now, which is like 30% white, 30% Asian, 30% South Asian, like Indian.
Right.
So
Yeah.
that's kind of like what I always call like the trifecta of our neighborhood.
Yeah. 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 Because
Yeah.
yeah. Go ahead. Sorry.
Yeah. Oh no, I just always laugh because it's kind of like those are the prevalent kind of visual, I guess, ethnicities that you see out and about if you go to the
Right.
grocery store and stuff. So
Right. Okay. I wanted to talk about it just because I always find it fascinating when I talk to different people, even if they go to like similar schools where, like, for example, they could be like one of the only few Asian kids in the school, the interpretation they have about that. And also their identity could be vastly different, right? So one person can be like, oh, I'm more curious about finding out by my root. And like, what, I'm very different. So they're more sensitive to that being different. There's also other people could be like, well, I'm not that being Westernized is just a part of me. So, have you ever thought about that, or did you think that you just flowed with it and you just went with it?
I think I only thought about it later in life.
Mm.
Like earlier on, I was kind of just like, well, I'm me, and like just going through the world. Someone said something to me really interesting that had stuck with me, and in the last few years, I thought about it a lot more again. But I remember like when I was like, maybe it was probably elementary or early high school, well, young. And I remember it was someone who was Asian, and it was like, oh, in this world and like in North America, you may not like see yourself or identify as very Asian, but you
Mm.
look Asian. So you're going to have to work 3 times harder than everybody else for the rest of your life. And
Yeah.
that's just the way it is. And I thought, well,
That's
what a stupid thing. What a stupid thing to say.
sad.
Yeah, I thought, oh, what a stupid thing to say. Like, that doesn't make any sense. And like, I think too, because I was very fortunate to live quite a privileged upbringing and going to this, kind of, this independent school that was very supportive, and the
Right.
ethos of the school, literally their motto is let every spirit soar. So they're very much about like everyone having an opportunity to succeed and feel good and feel supported. So I thought, oh, that's ridiculous. And then as I went out later into the world, then you start going, oh yeah, okay, I kind of see what you mean. I can see it happen. Or even if it doesn't necessarily happen to me, I can see it occur for other Asian people, if that makes sense. Or in the Western world, I could see it being, see someone not like be discriminated against, but just have like a little bit of a disadvantage for anyone coming to North America who like isn't Westernized already. I think like being a different ethnicity and being born in North America and being Westernized is like a very unique
combination.
It's a unique combination, yeah. And I can relate really easily to other people who have that experience.
Yeah.
But then I can also see how the experience is different for someone coming from another country, whether it be Asia or Europe or wherever, and probably it's the same for someone, coming from North America going to Asia. So it's like an interesting, it's just like this difference of perspective, I think. And because it's how you see yourself, right?
Yeah. And I have a lot to say just because I've seen it like in so many different ways about how that identity shifts. And it's, honestly, sometimes I think a lot of it is in our heads, but that part in our heads determines so much about the person that we are, right? And the person who we believe that we can be, the kind of roles we can do in society. And I, like just because I went to Edmonton, when I was in Canada, and a lot of people there, and I was talking about it on the other episode, is a lot of people there, they felt like they could only be, like a pharmacist, not even doctor, right? But like a pharmacist or accountant, and not even like a lawyer, right? If you're a doctor or lawyer, then you're a super Asian. That's what they, there,
interesting.
They thought that, because they thought that, because it's such a minority, right? It's like less than, at that time, like less than 5%. And the majority of the people there are Caucasian. And a lot of these roles traditionally were held by Caucasians. I think the Asian immigrants, even if they're born there, they never had any role models in these jobs. They also, I think maybe they were taught by their parents, who are perhaps, they went there with nothing, right? And then, so they were like these like quiet, very hardworking immigrants from oftentimes like Hong Kong, and or like they didn't really have a choice. That's why they went to North America, because of what happened in Hong Kong. And so they were taught, these kids, that growing up, I just need to be hardworking, or like put my head down, work, and get a stable job, and not like really a flashy job because like I don't deserve it, or like, it's not reserved for me, right? So to me, it was a shock because I was thinking, like, English is not my first language. And when I was there, I didn't know anyone. But in my head, I was like, I can be whoever I want to be because that's what my mom taught me. And, back in China, and like, you can be like, I never even heard about like, oh, you can only be a pharmacist or like accountant that play small. But I do think that being also in Vancouver, where you have all these people, like it's a pretty big Asian community. And if, for example, like your parents are a lot more supportive and they also ask you to think bigger, like that completely changes your life trajectory, right?
Definitely. I think it's actually so interesting, kind of what you just said there. I always find it quite interesting talking to anyone who comes kind of from an immigrant family background, but say is, born in Canada or the US or something. The little like hangups that come with the diaspora of the people who immigrated before. The generation immigrate, say they immigrate 1950s or something. So they're leaving Asia in the 1950s and they're taking whatever the culture and whatever the norm is at that time. And then they it sticks in their family and it becomes part of their identity in the Western world. So then by now at 2025, they have these antiquated ideas that have stuck with them. Meanwhile, it's interesting to hear you grew up in China and you had a kind of the opposite upbringing and encouragement, whereas and then in North America we're given a lot of definitely a very specific perspective of other countries, and so we would assume, oh, China, you're probably not allowed to do anything because it's oh, it's communist, you can't do anything. Meanwhile, it's here that they're oh, you can't do this, you can't do that, and also I think goes into play of being the I heard a term in 2020. I remember it was called the model minority, whereas Asians, they kind of put their head down, they work hard, they don't try to be too out there, loud, or seen. And so then, in other Western cultures, it's oh, they're so, Asians, that's the model minority. Even if you don't act like how they act, then you're not as good, I think. That comes into play with a lot of other ethnicities of Hispanic, Black, etc., Indigenous. So it's interesting how that they kind of culturally, Asians just decided that somehow to just be this quiet, hardworking, and then that trickles down into the kids generations later, where it's you've got to be this certain profession, and you have to be this, and you have to fit in type of thing.
So for example, I definitely feel there is a huge component where people don't necessarily talk about, which is the socioeconomic component in all of these, right? Because I think it almost doesn't really matter where you grow up. If you're made to believe that the sky is the limit, and also your parents, you seeing them doing something where it inspires you, you will have that innate belief that I can achieve it. And for example, even I was thinking this generation of people, they're very different, and I've seen there's a bunch of Chinese American billionaires now, quite a number of them, right, in their late 20s and early 30s, because they built AI companies and tech companies and stuff like that. And some of them are from, I think, the Skill AI co-founder, from computer science, professor kind of family background. And, maybe they're from the parents' generation from China, but the level they're thinking about, right, it's much higher, right? They're thinking okay, I gotta that person versus a person who, for example, came from Hong Kong 30-40 years ago and opened a Chinese restaurant in Edmonton. I mean, that would be completely different.
Yeah, totally. So, it's a different perspective for sure.
Yeah, exactly.
And probably a different background, I would assume.
Yeah, and it has a closer relationship between that, the socioeconomic status and how you view yourself and how you view your potential than, for example, whether you're from North America or whether you're from China.
Yeah, I agree. I think the socioeconomic part is a huge piece.
Yeah. People oftentimes talk about race, right? But nobody talk about that because it's
they talk about the race and ethnicity, and then I go, well, there's another piece, because if you just go into various circles of socioeconomic brackets, you'll actually see many different ethnicities coming together, and they have more similarities because of their day-to-day lifestyle, their access to certain things, their way of thinking, their education. It's all going to be tied to the socioeconomics.
Yeah, I think that people don't want to talk about it because it's very a touchy-feely, topic where people are oh, the world is not fair, whatever. It's just, I don't know whether you agree, but I felt there is a component of this where if you talk about race, it's something you can't change, right? I'm born, Chinese, I'm born Asian. I can't change that. I'm born a woman. Talking, it's a twisted way of okay, I'm a minority. This is what I'm faced with. And these are the hardship I need to go through. And I kind of can't change that part versus like socioeconomic status. Like you can change it yourself, like
Hmm.
you can, you thrive towards that goal. But we can't really play that victim narrative because
Right.
if it's all like merit based, then you can choose not to be a victim, right? That's exactly how you get out of this. And at least this is my own personal opinion. And I have gone through a lot of discrimination in being a minority, being a girl, being international, working in banking where I was the only like international female woman. And it was super unfair. But if I were to be stuck in that narrative, I would have gone nowhere in my life,
Hmm.
right? So
Hmm.
that was a conscious choice. But I just felt like, if we could all think about, hey, we actually have agency here. And if this, in the end, is more determined by your socioeconomic status, which sure, it's unfair, but it's something you can work towards than race. Isn't that more like we can actually create a better future, right?
Hmm. Yeah, I think that's very hopeful and very like positive way of seeing things. I mean, yeah, there's certain things, obviously there are barriers then to socioeconomic mobility, but yes, it's something a little bit, I would say it is more changeable than your race, right? So
Yeah.
I think it's definitely, I guess it would be something that you can say, okay, well, I can't change this and I can't change that, but here's something that I might have the ability to change. So if I'm not happy with my current state, well, then I should work towards changing that.
Yeah,
Um,
exactly.
yeah.
Even though it's
Whereas like, yeah, if you're like having identity crisis as being Asian, well, sorry, you're Asian. So, you kind of have to like, you have to, figure that one out and just carve your space. I mean, like
yeah.
someone like me, like, being born in Canada and being Asian, but not really feeling super Asian, especially, like when I see newer people immigrating
Yeah.
to Canada, I definitely find that I can't relate to them
Yeah,
in
for
many
sure.
ways. And that language aside, like they're speaking English and everything. It's just, there's just cultural differences and stuff. So I don't necessarily identify in that way, but then I also don't really identify, um, with white Caucasians 100% either, I think. But then I also think everyone brings something unique to the table too.
Yeah. End
When
of
when you
day,
can come together on it. So,
yeah, and end of the day is also about discovering who you are, right? And it's really not about what's external. It's about finding that core that you have, and everybody's got a different core, right? Regardless of how they look. So I wanted to go deeper into when you're saying that obviously you are from White Rock, right? It's a very peaceful, very quiet, but also very comfortable town. And going to New York City, which I'm currently at, New York City, is chaos.
totally
uh,
different. Yeah.
it's so different energy. And also in Canada, it's like everybody's nice, right? And in New York City, that's like kind of the opposite.
I know.
So,
I used to joke that New York is so busy that like, people don't hold the door open for each other in New York, because if you start holding the door open for one, you're
my
holding the door
gosh,
open for like 100 people.
entire time. Yeah,
Because it's just
exactly.
so busy that you get stuck. You hold the door, and then all of a
Yeah,
sudden, everyone just kind of like
yeah,
walks past you. And it's not because they're not nice. I mean, I had great friendships form and great relationships in New York. I think it's just that there are just so many people, and it's just so busy that if you don't focus,
yeah.
if you start, dilly dallying and doing other things, you just get lost in the mix. But I think, funny enough, at the root of it all, I live back in Ocean Park, in the area that I grew up in, and it's like quiet. It's by the beach, and I could see myself even living more rural than this.
Mm, mm.
At one point, at many points, I'm always like, it'd be nice to just like go on live in like the countryside and like live a very like simple rural life. But New York was interesting because I think when I was in that high school age, I was very much kind of like, my routine, like I was saying before, was very the same every day. It was just borderline boring. Like, I'm just doing this, and there was nothing. It was very peaceful.
Yeah,
So obviously, then when you're in this kind of coming of age, you're like, oh, I want more stimulation and
yeah.
excitement and an adventure. So moving to New York was an absolute adventure, and it fueled and filled that space where I
Hmm.
wanted to, have that discovery and excitement of something different.
Right, right. And did you think that you found it? Something surprising to me is also like, obviously you you're really much into like styles and fashion. And then you're saying that, oh, I can live in a more rural area than that. I mean, like to me, it was just like, what? How can you have
Yeah,
style
I
in a
mean,
rural area?
I think I think style and fashion are like two different things. So I think style is related to your lifestyle, to the climate you're in,
Yeah.
and just like having an aesthetic driven eye.
Yeah.
When I was younger, I was also into fashion, which I think is definitely more, human created. And then learning about fashion from an academic standpoint too. It's really interesting how fashion and trends actually mimic and can inform on economic trends at the
Interesting.
time as well. Like we had and when I was there in New York studying, it was during the Great Recession, 2008. It was really interesting actually to see that come into play. And those things were like at work live in front of me. So yeah, I mean, the fashion industry I enjoyed. And so being in New York for that and like, a little bit after university, that was super cool. And then I moved to Toronto and stayed there for 10 years. And that was also, such a big capital of fashion, media, the marketing world, everything for Canada. It really dictates everything through the rest of the country. So those were really great times. And like, I think you kind of have to be in the action for that.
Yeah.
But then as I got older, I guess I've become less interested in fashion and the fashion industry and just interested in other things. I think it's just part of getting older a little bit too. I mean, I still love fashion, have fun with it. And I think, personal style is just so important. It's who you are. It represents your whole vibe, right? It's your first impression. It's still such an important thing, but it's just, I think as you get older, it's not as important in your life.
Right. Do you think those moments represented who you were, or it's just that those city energy brought up that part of you, or
Both.
like kind of, okay.
Both. I think they were influencing each other. I really wanted, I was really excited by it. And then, the city energy was giving me even more inspiration and more excitement. And it was kind of like a cycle fueling itself in the best way. I think it was such a great kind of, I guess, at that age too, when you're in your early 20s, teens, early 20s, you're also figuring out who you are. So fashion is a big part of your life. Style is a big part of your life because you're figuring out who you are and how you want the world to see you, and how you see yourself and how you want the world to see you, how the world sees you versus how you want the world to see you. And so then you're experimenting with all sorts of fashion, and then it's developing your style. And then as you get older, then you have a vibe, you have a style.
Right. And this is, this might be a little bit off topic, but this is actually what I noticed of fashion in North America. Like at least in big capital cities such as New York City, and maybe Toronto, but also, for example, now I'm in Singapore and I see how people view fashion there. And I think there's also a little bit nuance between, say, Singapore and Shanghai, or like Singapore and Seoul, Korea. It's like there is definitely a little bit more, especially in a place like Singapore, like there's definitely a little bit more of a follower energy versus like a leader, right? So like I think that, if you're in Paris or New York, like you feel people there create fashion, even the person on the street, like sipping coffee by the street, the scarf they're wearing, like the glasses they're wearing, like it's all because they like that style. But because of that, it like they become the style, right? Because it's so unique. Versus I felt like in Singapore, it's like people just look at celebrities and they look at whatever is hot and in right now, and they try to mimic that. And like it's a little bit more dull, right? Like that's just my sense of it. And did you feel that way in New York and Toronto?
I totally
create that. Yeah.
I totally get what you're saying. And I think again, that's like the difference between fashion and style. I think style, someone who has great style just looks effortless. They look comfortable in what they're wearing. They have probably an outfit that could be simple or complex, but they look comfortable. And I think fashion is all about trends. It's about newness. It's about being avant-garde. The person wearing it doesn't necessarily look comfortable. but they're
No,
just
yeah,
they're on trend, but they don't necessarily have style, but they're on trend.
yeah,
And I think
yeah,
those are two different things. And certainly in the fashion industry,
yeah,
it's about pushing trends for
yeah, yeah.
sales. So they want people to follow and have the latest and greatest
Of
look.
course.
And
Yeah.
then everyone ends up looking the same. But it's
Yeah,
because
yeah, exactly.
it's, and you kind of see like, it's like, oh, okay, well, which brand or which store is selling the most? Because that's what everyone looks like.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
And
And I think,
you have like other, like business like Shein that just kind of copy, like you can just
oh
buy something
gosh,
super
yeah,
cheap, right?
I know I mean, I actually really hate that. It's just kind of like polluting the world with junk that people don't need, because it's
Yeah.
just, it's stuff that people, they think they need, but they
They think
actually
they
don't
need.
need it at all. So,
Yeah, exactly. Exactly.
yeah.
And so you launched Kenton Magazine in 2010. That's when you were in Toronto, right? Or did you launch that in New
So
York?
I started it in New York, and then I kind of brought it with me back to Toronto. It's all online.
Yeah.
And so it was the beginning of the editorial side, right? So that was all about showcasing brands and designers and artists,
Right.
musicians. We kind of had a traditional spin on it, because we used to do our own, editorial photo shoots and all of that.
Yeah.
But then as the brand progressed, eventually then I closed it, because my personal brand was taking off at the same
Mm,
time, and
mm.
kind of, it was demanding more of my time and energy, and I was getting, the business of the personal brand was growing more than the editorial. So, I mean, it
Right.
was all kind of meshed together anyway, because Kenton's my middle name anyway. So
Yeah.
that was the name
Yeah.
of the magazine. It was actually one of my former roommates, and friends from university, that I was brainstorming names, and my friend was just like, you should just name it Kenton. Like, that's such a
It is.
cool
It
middle
sounds
name, and like,
honestly, it
just
sounds like
do
a
it.
fashion brand name, like a Fendi or
Yeah,
like.
exactly. So I think it did have a nice ring to it. It worked. I always wondered about my middle name, and there it then became part of my personal brand. So,
Yeah.
um,
So what gave you the audacity to believe in something that didn't exist yet? Because I know that you also worked in some fashion or like
mhm.
style magazines publication, but you decided to do your own thing. And was it scary to do that? Was it hard to believe that you could pull it off?
Yes and no. I think I was young and naive enough to just like go for it and leap into it. And I was living and breathing it, right? So like, you're young, single, nothing to lose, right? So
Yeah.
you just go full force head on. And that, yeah, like, would I do it now again? I don't know. But then it was, I think too, there was so much possibility and so much potential. Having kind of had these experiences in traditional print editorial magazines, I was just seeing how everything was going digital, and how
Yeah.
they were kind of afraid of the death of print at the time.
Yeah.
It's funny, the death of print has been carrying on now over a decade, and it's like still this ongoing narrative, and yet they
But
are
it's a slow
still
death. It is
they
dying, but
are
it's just
they are
slow.
still printing. So I'm like, it's not really the death of print, it's just that the death of the bad print, because it won't
Yeah,
survive.
that's true.
The good stuff
That's
always
true.
still goes. So
Yeah.
I just saw so much potential with the online, and I felt like, I guess being young too, I was like, I'm pretty online savvy, I'm social media savvy, like I could do this on my own and make something
Mm,
of it, and I might
mm,
as well try.
yeah.
So I did, and it did work out, but it was definitely just, perseverance. You just keep going and going and going and going, and you just keep knocking on doors and trying to make it happen. And, it was, and I kind of had an idea of how to at least work with the publicists and the brands and how to get that access. So that definitely gave me a leg up, in making it happen faster. But it was slowly but surely, we would be working with brands on, started with just going to fashion shows and profiling designers, talking about the shows, then all of a sudden getting invited to their showroom and doing these one-on-one interviews with the designers and sharing this
Oh my gosh.
exclusive
Sounds so
access.
exciting. I
It
mean, it's
was.
just
It was
like,
super exciting, especially for the time,
yeah.
because it was this exclusive access that nobody had. Twitter was a huge thing back then. So live tweeting of an event
Yeah.
or a situation was like such a big deal, and people were really looking and hungry for that. Now it's an oversaturation of content. You just can't, it's just overloaded of content. But back then it was like this famine of content, and people wanted to see things and have access. And like Twitter And then followed by Instagram was way faster access than waiting for a magazine to print. Even the New Yorker, which was printing, once a week, it's just not as fast. So that was really exciting. And I think being just in the right place at the right time too. I think it was a little bit of luck and timing mixed with the hard work and some foundational experience. Because we just kept going out doing this, collaborating, and then all of a sudden, the publicists and the brands and the marketers realized that there was value in it. And then that's when they said, okay, we're going to start. We want it, we want our specific message. We'll pay for that. And then that's when that, the business side of it really took off. Because at first we just had some like banner ads on our websites, which wasn't super innovative or anything. It was kind of just like, here's the content, here's an ad, very traditional. But then it got more creative in terms of the marketing strategies.
What makes it very interesting initially is, I think, is just that you personally could get these exclusive access to these brands. And that's probably, you probably felt very excited about that, right? And then also on top of that, you were sharing with people who wanted to have that kind of content. So that's like additional excitement. But also it seems like on the later stage, there is innovation in the business model as well.
Mm-hmm.
And that probably brought even like more excitement because you see what's possible and you can use that business side of things, the growth, to fuel the rest of the content and impact.
Definitely. Yeah, I think it's constantly evolving. I mean, even right now, it has evolved way beyond. Like, I think kind of when I was at the peak of my involvement in the industry, I felt like quite a leader doing things that were not being done before. And like, it was really fresh and exciting. And now I'm slowly like fading out of that industry wise. So I'm not as like up to speed on what the latest and greatest is. And then I think marketing is changing too. Like we still have lots of friends in marketing and PR. And last year, one of the things that has started to shift is that like brands are not as keen on influencer marketing initiatives. And now they're starting to look for, well, then it became from the mega influencers became very unrelatable because the more celebrity and the more, financial success they had, the more out of touch they became. So they're unrelatable. Then it was the micro influencers, people around 10 to 20,000 followers that are interesting to relate to, and it's your everyday influencer. And then now they're looking for people who may not even have platforms, but are very influential in their social circles or in society, and who also have the buying power to purchase the product. Like I think there was always this tie-in. Like I at one point drove a Mercedes. I did collaborations with Mercedes-Benz, and it was a very authentic collaboration because I was also a customer of the brand. But there were also a lot of influencers at the time who had never driven a Mercedes, do not own one, have never owned one. And they would be doing the collaboration too. And I just felt that was always so inauthentic. And so did the people in the PR side of things. So now they're going to this shift, which is really, I find really fascinating, where they are trying to find like top customers of a brand and they invite them to do the experience that the influencers used to do, like the traveling or these hosted dinners or brand reveals of new products launching and all that kind of stuff. And it's pretty cool because you're then tapping into this already loyal customer base, which is then going to influence their immediate circles and like the circles of spheres of influence that you can't see. And so I think that's kind of like this next level marketing of where we're at now, like in 2025. So it's interesting. And so that's also another reason I'm like, the influencer world is so oversaturated. A few years ago, I already felt it was oversaturated. And now knowing that marketing has gone in this direction, there's less ad dollars as well. So there's all these people fighting for a shrinking budget, and which is kind of the way that things went with print editorial. It was a shrinking budget because the budget is getting allocated elsewhere. There is still budget for print, there is still budget for influencers, but it's just not as much as that initial trend, the marketing trend.
Yeah. And I think it's probably because also people have seen that authenticity is so important of driving engagement and also
100%.
driving actions. In the meantime, people themselves have also seen they wanted to find their authentic community. They don't want to be sold to. by some out of touch people who actually only care about their own interests, right? So like everything kind of happened organically, and people are now going more grassroots level in the real communities.
Totally.
If this conversation sparked something in you, share it with someone who needs to hear it. And if you are building a more true life, not just more impressive, we would love to hear your story. Follow us on Instagram, YouTube, and TikTok at Asian Rebel Club and join our newsletter for more ways to connect. Link in the description. Until next time.